Well, good morning. Here is the first of our video pieces on topics of interest to NIU Victorians, and this one is, of course, on Ruskin and Ruskin's anti-industrialism. Ruskin is anti-industrialist, and what I would like to do in this moment, this is a sheet of notes, of course, that I trust and I hope is already in your possession, so you can follow along with the notes or on the sheet if you'd like, or you can just listen and maybe go back to the notes later. But yeah, we're beginning with this paragraph that I'm going to allow those of you who have the Norton, I'll give you a few seconds to find that. I hope you've already, even before you started the video, I hope that you went and turned to the Ruskin excerpt. So this should be a pretty easy paragraph to find. It's number 13 if you're following what I sent you over email some time ago, 5 days ago or so. And this is where we'll start in this very dramatic moment, at a certain moment, in media res, I suppose you could say, of the essay and the discussion of Gothic, which at this point turns to a discussion of an English room, this English room. In your case, this American room. Look round this American room. Notice the language. And now, reader, look round this English room of yours. We've reached a dramatic moment in the argument, a present time, as Arnold might say, who wrote that essay, Function of Criticism at the Present Time. A now, and now, reader. Note the direct address as well. The reader is directly addressed. You are directly addressed. Note the imperative mood. It's a command. Look. We've seen that before, have we not? Dramatic moment, an instructive moment, even a morally instructive moment. Look, and you'll see something that might just change you morally forever. We saw that in Dickens, didn't we? I don't even need to say where. I'll just say The Ghost of Christmas Present. So what do we see when we obey? What do we see in this English room? Well, we'll read the passage here in a moment, but I think what we see is not what we see when we look, as we are bidden to do by Dickens, or Dickens's agent there, the Ghost of Christmas Present, who discloses, does he not, wanton ignorance, embodiments of social imperfection, we might put it euphemistically for the moment. We see not social imperfection, we see industrial perfection. Those moldings. Examine, we are told, again, all those accurate moldings and perfect polishings and unerring adjustments of the seasoned wood and tempered steel. We see a well-built house built to machine perfection. And I think it should already be clear there's something the matter with this. There's something really deeply wrong about this for Ruskin, which maybe is not immediately present and to all of us. Just to read the passage, examine again all those accurate moldings and perfect polishings and unerring adjustments of the seasoned wood and tempered steel. Many a time you have exulted over them. Have you ever done that? And thought how great England was, or America, because her slightest work was done so thoroughly. Alas, if read rightly, which he's attempting to teach us how to read it rightly, these perfectnesses, there's that word I wanted, are signs of a slavery in our England 1,000 times more bitter. We'll continue with the business about slavery. You can tell he doesn't like it, which is all that you really have to note at this point. He doesn't like those perfectnesses. And, you know, this is an issue, isn't it? I mean, why wouldn't he like, don't we like perfection? Don't we strive for it? Don't we like perfectnesses? If you'll back up a little bit to paragraph 11, you'll see that even Ruskin admits that the modern English mind, as he puts it, or the modern American mind, as we might put it, has this much in common with that of the Greek, which, as you know, whenever any Victorian talks about a Greek, it's typically favorably. It has this much in common with the Greek that it intensely desires in all things the utmost completion or perfection compatible with their nature. It goes on to describe this as a noble character in the abstract. But you can tell that in the particular embodiment, he's not going to find it very noble. Right? And, you know, I think we have to wonder why. What would be the problem problem with these perfections, these perfectnesses that so please the modern English mind? Don't we like our windows well built, our houses well built, our windows well built? Here's a quick little depiction of, this is taken off the Pella Window website, and you will see a woman working to create a perfect window, right? Working at her machine. We all want these perfect Pella windows. I have a couple of them in my own house here, which is a 1928 cottage that, trust me, needed some new windows. So what's the what's the problem with perfection? I think you probably already know, having done the reading, that he gets into this question, especially at the end of the excerpt. More generally, what we have is a kind of critique of perfection. But in this moment, its worth or value as a human aim or goal. We should leave that issue, the more general, critique of perfection, for later. The issue to clarify now is that of these these industrial perfections, and what the problem is with them. And I think the problem with them is that they cost us something. Okay, to achieve them, we must sacrifice something. Excuse me. And then the question arises, of course, what? What do we have to sacrifice? Well, back to the Pella picture, look at the woman, the worker, who, I don't know about you, but it's difficult for me at least, to tell what she's doing there. I mean, I haven't a note. I was looking at a Pella window website, so I know what she's doing. But she seems to be working a machine, right? And she seems to be more of a machine operator than an artisan or a craftsperson crafting one of these beautiful Pella windows, right? So what is the cost? Okay, well, the cost is, and this is something maybe we've already discussed, put most broadly and dramatically, what is the cost? That the cost is, we can put this dramatically. We don't have to even speak wildly, as he says he's not doing later. Let me not be thought to speak wildly or extravagantly when he speaks of what happens to you when you operate a machine. Let's avoid extravagance, I suppose, when we say that the whole human being is lost thereby when one creates a window by way of a machine, right? The whole human being is lost. Let me find you a passage, point you to a passage that will speak to this rather directly in the excerpt, and this is paragraph 12. As he puts it, observe you are put to stern choice in this matter. You must either make a tool of the creature or a man of him. You cannot make both. Men were not intended to work with the accuracy of tools, to be precise and perfect in all their actions. So perfections and precisenesses are just not something that we can do and remain men. If you will have that precision out of men or women, of course, this is the typical language of the Victorians, if you will have that precision out of the human and make their fingers measure degrees like cogwheels and their arms strike curves like compasses, you must, it's a very important word, unhumanize them. You must unhumanize them, okay? And he goes on to talk a little bit about, right, what's lost, what it means to dehumanize or to unhumanize in this passage and elsewhere, this mention of such matters as he puts it, the eye of the soul. That exactness, that precision, excuse me. What does it do to one's own ideas, images, impulses, whims, notions, inspirations? Well, they all become distractions from the task of reproducing the form already decided upon and reproducing it precisely and perfectly. Machines don't have those things, see? They don't have those human things that have to be shed if we are to, in fact, behave as machines behave, if we are to imitate unthinking, unfeeling machines so as to produce perfection. So in becoming machines, and becoming as precise and perfect as machines, and becoming as able to produce perfection as machines are, we have to lose what is most human in us, which he describes as, in various places throughout the essay, right? But there's some nice mention of such in, speaks of the thoughtful part of this in paragraph 11, right? Which is, the moment in which we've had a look at that already, but it's the one in which he's discussing perfection. As it goes on, this is a noble character in the abstract, but becomes ignoble when it causes us to forget the relative dignities of that human nature itself, and to prefer the perfectnesses of the lower nature to the imperfection of the higher. This is a kind of a complicated point that he's making, but as he goes on, he does characterize some of those human things that are lost when we achieve a mechanical degree of perfection. If you'll start right there with the now about mid-page. Now, in the make and nature of every man, however rude or simple, whom we employ in manual labor, there are some powers for better things. Some tardy imagination, torpid capacity of emotion, tottering steps of thought there are, even at the worst. And at the bottom of the paragraph, you'll see what I've highlighted. This, as he puts it, in short, the thoughtful part of our workers. That is what is lost when we shed the human. We're shedding the thoughtful part of humans. When we achieve the mechanical, pursue the perfect, and seek the precise. So I think it's time to offer a generalization about Ruskin's argument against industrialism. And what I would like to say is that Ruskin argument number one against, there's a second one, his argument number one against industrialism is a moral, emotional appeal. Industrialism unhumanizes, you'll remember that term. I think the term we would use is dehumanizes. And you can see the problem with this. Right, you know, if one cares about other humans, there's a problem with this, right? Moral persons do care about other humans, presumably. So one cannot advocate imperialism if one is moral. So there's the argument, right? One cannot, for example, advocate division of labor is one of those things that one would, if one is committed to perfection, that one would want to advocate or find oneself most assuredly advocating. And what I thought I would do is, in fact, show you what Prince Albert, of all people, you know, his Victoria's husband, had to say. I'm not sure how well you can read that. And I think you've already determined this is not exactly a high-tech presentation. So I'll just read it. But this is what Prince Albert has to say, the Prince Consort, Queen Victoria's husband, had to say about division of labor, which he refers to as the great principle of division of labor. He says, he associates it with the realization of the unity of mankind. Maybe you'll get a sense of how that might work when I read this paragraph. The distances which separated the different nations and parts of the globes, he said this at the First World's Fair, also known as the Crystal Palace, in a comment he made at its opening. The distances which separated the different nations and parts of the globe are rapidly vanishing before the achievements of modern invention, and we can traverse them with incredible ease. The languages of all nations are known, and their acquirement placed within the reach of everybody. Thought is communicated with rapidity and even by the power of lightning. On the other hand, the great principle of division of labor, which may be called the moving power of civilization, is being extended to all branches of science, industry, and art. And he finds this to be a just absolutely unqualified good, okay? And we could, if we had a little bit more time, we could see how or why that works, right? But we don't. So what I thought I would do instead is show you what Ruskin, and I think maybe you've already found this for yourself, I wouldn't be a bit surprised, what Ruskin had to say about the division of labor, which is that, right? Hang on one second. Again, the high-tech quality of this presentation, I hope, is something that's just stealing away your breath, right? Well, okay, I can't seem to find it, but I think maybe you can, right? It's not difficult, easily found. It's just in my paper rush here I'm having difficulty, but it begins, it's a paragraph that begins, we have of late much studied, we have much studied and much perfected of late the great, oh, here it is. We have much studied and much perfected of late the great civilized invention of the division of labor. Only we give it a false name. The labor that, for it is not truly speaking, the labor that is divided, and I find this very profound, but the men. divided into mere segments of men, broken into small fragments and crumbs of life so that all the little piece of intelligence that is left in a man is not enough to make a pin or a nail, but exhausts itself in making the point of a pin or the head of a nail. Yeah, it's, and he goes on to talk about the industrial rationale for this division, dividing up of these different tasks, which I saw showing up figuring fairly significantly in Blade Runner, that sci-fi film, I think from the 90s, has Harrison Ford in it, in which you will recall one guy does eyes, another guy does brains, and they sort of work their way, the replicants work their way up the hierarchy towards the designer of the entire being, but that's neither here nor there. This is one of those things that has to go if you're going to follow Ruskin's advice, right? You're not going to divide man in so dividing labor, right? And I just wanted to give this one very practical outcome of his argument. Okay, so that argument one, argument two, is, I think, more practical. And I think, attack upon the very notion of the division of labor is just as pertinent to argument number two as it is to argument number one. I bet you will not be too surprised at this one. It's more of a practical appeal, an appeal to one's self-interest as opposed to a moral appeal, right? I hope this double-prong attack reminds you of Dickens and his allegory of wanton ignorance, where you will recall that, like Dickens, having tried to shame you, the next tries to scare you. And you could say the same about Ruskin. Like Dickens, having first tried to shame you, Ruskin next tries to scare the hell out of you, right? And we can go back to this business about the second exacerbating the first. If you go back to that distinction that I made earlier, in Dickens we have what's revealed when you look obediently at an instructive scene is social imperfection. In Ruskin, it's industrial perfection. Well, the two are connected here, aren't they? That social imperfection, one particular form of social imperfection, is in fact exacerbated, maybe even created to begin with, by industrial perfection, according to Ruskin. Industrial perfection worsens social imperfection in the form of social resentment and unrest, and you can think of ignorance in Dickens in this moment. And it does so by stealing away one's work satisfaction, thus stirring hatred for the bosses and the owners and the wealthy and all the rest, the Bounderbys, as the origin of this unhumanizing daily life, right? And this is a nice time to turn to that later paragraph that we've already come upon a couple of times, which is paragraph 13. It's the paragraph we started with, actually. And now, reader, look around this English room of yours. You'll see all these perfections. And what does he see them? Here he reads them. Here he reads them rightly. Alas, if read rightly, these perfections, this is paragraph 13 again. These perfections are signs of a slavery in our England 1,000 times more bitter and more degrading than that of the scourged African or helot Greek. Men may be beaten, chained, tormented, yoked like cattle, slaughtered like summer flies, and yet remain in one sense, in the best sense, free. But to smother their souls within them, to blight and hew into rotting pollards the suckling branches of their human intelligence, to make the flesh and skin. It goes on from there. Mostly in this paragraph, aside from the reference to slavery, right, and even with that, making the moral argument, and not really trying to scare you as much, except insofar as there have been a bunch of slave revolts outside of England, that, you just talk about slavery and it becomes a little bit more than just a moral issue, just when it's introduced as such. But it's the later paragraph, paragraph 15, where we get the full frontal, fright fest. Let me not, this is the one that begins, you've seen it before, the opening. Let me not be thought to speak wildly or extravagantly. It is verily this degradation of the operative into a machine, which is great language to describe his whole concept, which more than any other evil of the times is leading the mass of the nations everywhere into vain, incoherent, destructive, struggling for a freedom of which they cannot explain the nature to themselves. This is worth continuing. Their universal outcry against wealth and against nobility is not forced from them either by the pressure of famine or the sting of mortified pride. These do much and have done much in all ages, but the foundations of society were never yet shaken as they are at this time. It is not that men are ill-fed, but that they have no pleasure in the work by which they make their bread, and therefore look to wealth as the only means of pleasure. It is not that men are pained by the scorn of the upper classes, but they cannot endure their own, for they feel that the kind of labor to which they are condemned is verily a degrading one, and makes them less than men. We could continue, and there's some really great stuff. That never had the upper classes so much sympathy, he says, with the lower, or charity for them as they have at this day, and yet never were they so much hated by them. For of old, the separation between the noble and the poor was merely a wall built by law. Now it is a veritable difference in level of standing, a precipice between upper and lower grounds for the field of humanity. And there is a pestilential air at the bottom of it. And he goes on. Slavery comes back into the discussion. But you can see what he's doing. I mean, what he's saying is that, there's a second reason why, in fact, industrialism is really not a good thing for us to commit to in some kind of in any unqualified form or to any unqualified degree. Because it leads to social unrest, that vain striving after freedom that he seems to think has less to do with the workday, the length of the workday, for example, or just the number of hours that you spend, how tired you are at the end of the day. It has more to do with the quality of the work that you're doing. In other words, you could have somebody who was really taking pleasure in building a pyramid or building a cathedral would not be bothered, even though he or she was putting in a 90-hour work week, would not have this desperation at heart the way you have when you work in a factory. That's his claim. And so he ends up making some rather extreme, one might even say wild and extravagant claims about the latter. Well, there's more to be said. I've got some questions that will follow up, but the piece now is 22 minutes long, so I'm going to end it and invite you to have a look at the notes if you haven't already. Again, there's some questions at the bottom, and I'll tell you what to do with those soon enough. So thanks for your patience, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye-bye.